All right. Love the theme music. We're dancing in the background throughout. It's the club scene.
We're getting all excited. So hello, welcome to another episode of the Project Failure Files. I'm Sharon Weaver, CEO of Smarter Consulting.
And I am Christian Buckley, founder of Collab Talk. And welcome to another episode of our series where Sharon and I will explore what not to do as you manage projects.
If you are a project manager or have a role where you're responsible for leading and overseeing projects, this series is definitely for you. In every episode of the Project Failure Files, we'll talk about some of the most common pitfalls in project management, sharing personal stories and experiences, and explore strategies and best practices to help you be successful.
Essentially is, and this is kind of our shtick here, but it's about what not to do. That's our tagline. That's our gotcha in there. And why. And so we hope to make it a good mixture of both theoretical concepts as well as practical examples and best practices.
So for this episode, we're going to be talking about failures in the area of risk management. We'll share some of our experiences anticipating the unforeseen. We're going to share some personal stories. We'll share some advice on how you can reduce or mitigate the inherent risks in your role as a project manager.
Our structure for these episodes is pretty simple. If you're new, first we define and outline the topic. We talk about it, dissect it a bit, do some basic analysis of the problem.
Second, we share some real life stories and examples to help you understand the scope of the issue.
Third, we talk about some practical solutions, providing you with both actionable strategies to improve your project management skills.
We also try to address the cultural issues of each topic, because to make any kind of lasting change, you need to understand and address your organization's cultural dynamics.
It's often the biggest issue for the failures is their cultural issues. So not understanding your organization. But finally, we wrap up. We always talk about preventive measures. What can we do? What have we done? What are we currently doing with clients and projects? So it's a lot to cover in a 30-minute session, but let's give it a try.
So let's kick things off and talk about failures in risk management.
Let's. And of course, feel free to comment throughout these episodes, the series, share your experiences. I will share some banners and links here so you can reach out and connect with Sharon and I. We always love to hear if we're missing any of your best practices, your practical examples, please let us know. And that includes, and I'll put the banner up now. This is relatively, so it's been going for a little while now, but we have the Facebook group, which is most active. A lot of practicing active PMs there, hopefully sharing their horror stories. It's one thing to talk about our successes. Everyone wants to talk about successes, but we learn so much from the failures. So let's talk failures and risk management.
Should we switch this to the project management support group? I feel like that's kind of what it is at this point.
Yeah, it's kind of turned into that. But yeah, so when you think about project management and risk management, Sharon, what do you think about?
I think about the idea of knowing what it is you're trying to do and being able to baseline things, because at the end of the day, if you don't understand your variables, you don't understand the things that you can manage and you can control, then you can't control anything, right? So I'm a Six Sigma black belt. And one of the things that Six Sigma really focuses on in risk is understanding your variables, understanding every single thing that goes in to something you're trying to accomplish. And as project managers, you're obviously worried about the big ones. And time, scope, budget, right? Mm-hmm. And if you understand that, that's some of your variables, but at the heart of risk management is the idea of understanding what could go wrong and what can I manage, what can I manage, what can I control, what can I control. But I think, when we talk about the failure parts of these, it's the idea of we're just going to do things and see how they land.
Yeah. I look at it as I think of I'm a process guy, I'm a governance guy, and I think of what is your process, your methodology, what's your approach? I mean, it's all part of the greater change management. And I often tell partners, clients that, organizations that are able to identify risks, identify change, and then mitigate those risks and make that change quickly. if they have a process in place, if they're not stymied by change, like we all fear, as humans, we fear change. Like I get that. But if you have a process in place, then you won't be rattled by those changes, by those risks. You get the data, you do you've got the process in place, you go and review it, you assess, you make then educated changes to the plan based on what you've identified. And so nobody has a crystal ball, nobody knows what's going to happen, but you could plan for and be prepared for those things. You can have an idea like the data is starting to skew in this direction. We may be having this issue, and have a process, build that into the planning, at least be able to answer questions around it in case it goes that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, so first of all, you used a big word that I hear a lot, and people always ask, what does that even mean? Because are you a project manager if you don't use the word mitigate?
Yeah.
So when we talk about risk, we talk about mitigating risk. So just to explain that, mitigating is the idea of understanding what is the thing that could go wrong and how am I going to control it? If it does go wrong, how do I keep it from going wrong if I can? And what happens if it does go wrong, right? So mitigation is just that idea of being able to manage whatever it is that's going wrong. But, I think one of the things that we don't do is have those conversations at the very beginning. And I was just joking about this the other day. We do everything around the happy path. I don't know if everybody always talks about the happy path. Well, guess what? The happy path is generally not going to happen because we're human and things happen and change comes up and, things don't go the way you expect. And I think I wish that we would more, when we have our initial project management meeting, say, hey, let's strategize, let's brainstorm. What are all the things that can go wrong? Let's have 30 minutes of just 100% brainstorming on what are all the problems? What are all the risks? I don't think we do that enough.
I just thought, like, I wish I had thought of having a Debbie Downer meme ready to go here, but this is, and it sounds like you don't want to be overly negative. You want to be optimistic about the plans, but you also need to be realistic about what the data shows. Here's a scenario, though. I actually just thought of this too, just remembered. It's funny how the mind works and how conversation opens it up. I had a very large multi-million-dollar project. I was an outside consultant brought in on owned part of this project, owned the planning, the communications aspect of that, where we had our QA team, and the head of the QA team was falsifying data on the initial testing for the design of this new system. Why? He was interested in golfing more, apparently, or something. And so he was just creating, he spent time to generate fake data and fake reports. Look, that's an extreme. I get it. But one of the learning things after he was fired, and we realized that this happened, and it skewed some decisions that would have been different decisions earlier on. One lesson we learned is, and this is a truth out there for risk management, is that the longer it takes you to identify the problem areas, the potential risks, the more expensive it becomes to solve that problem. So the earlier you can identify and adjust your planning around that, the better that you will be long term. But we also, one of the best practices out of that was having some redundancy in the data. Can we, and you see this in the scientific method, well, we did this test and got this result. Yeah, but can you repeat it? No. Right. You need to have repeatable failures for the data to be acceptable and move forward. Just like we should have never moved forward without being able to replicate the results of these falsified reports. But again, lesson learned around that.
And I think to that point, when I think about real world stuff, I think one of the things that really taught me a lot about measuring, right? You got to be able to measure it. So it has to be measurable. It has to be repeatable. The whole idea to that is that you understand, we know what it is. We know how to plan for it, and we know how to deal with it if it happens. So if the reports are not accurate, then that's going to cause a problem. If the reports are not there, that's going to cause a problem. I can't tell you, like, I would love to tell you one specific story of how I was on a project that we did not identify risk, or we didn't manage risk, or we didn't report on risk. There's so many. There's so many where you get in, especially as a consultant, and the client's like, I don't want to know about all that stuff. I just want to do the thing. Can you just do the thing? Just make the thing. And I'm like, right, but like, we need to think about, when I talk about, like, do we need a dev area? Do we need a non-prod area to build something in? Well, that's a waste of money. That's a waste of effort. Right. But when you're in the middle of a production deployment and you're struggling with something that could very seriously, go wrong and cause you an impact day to day, all of a sudden, all of that planning and all of that strategery behind the scenes of getting ready for what could go wrong matters a lot more, than if you didn't do it at all.
Yeah. No, I was thinking of my example as well with that very large client. They were almost $1 billion revenue a year company when I was working with them. They were about 850 million in revenue, and that they were aggressively pushing forward and pushing back on my, like, we need to assess our risk management here around this. And they was like, no, we need to make a decision. Like, we brought you in, you're the expert on this. I was, and the expert's telling you that we need to make database decisions around this. Here's what the data we thought was showing us. We've now shown that wasn't true. We need to go back and look at this, and it's going to be much more expensive. We're so aggressive on this initially, and we need to, we got our hands slapped, and we need to now be a little more careful around this. So they went back, and it was, I think that eventually they paid almost double what the initial estimates were, but it went well after that point because we were able to adjust based on actual data. It makes me think of, Sharon, you think of, what are the best practices for risk management? And I was thinking, one is just having a process in place where you're identifying actual risks. So you have an organized approach that you're looking at. What are the potential failures of our planning, of the technology? We don't have the right people. What are that's a huge one too. If you are over allocated, if you're not properly managing the resources, your people, and what you have in place, I mean, that is something where I don't think organizations are much more sensitive to the reality that they're burning out when they're burning out their employees. I think historically, certainly in my career, 30 plus year career, there was not enough discussion around and realistic planning taken into account as how overburdened are our employees with what we're having them to go and do. But that's part of that identifying risks, the people risks, the technology risks, the data is telling us this, analyzing each of those different pieces and talking about the likelihood of failure, the probability of failure around each of those areas. It's funny. I think we get more analysis to our salespeople around their pipeline. If anybody's worked in a sales organization, worked with a sales organization that was heavily focused on that, like the funnel of activities and the pipeline behind it, is like, how sure are you that these customers will close these projects, these POs in this quarter, and the standard that we hold the salespeople to that and how they get paid versus the way that we approach risk management in IT.
Yeah.
It usually shows a lot lacking over in IT.
Well, I think, generically, one of the things that people don't think about is that risk is tied directly to quality. And often, I'm gonna say this out loud. Often in IT, quality is not one of our primary things that we worry about. We worry about functional, we worry about done, but we don't tend to worry about quality. And I think part of it is because it's an expensive industry. A lot of businesses are paying a lot of money to do what they're doing and get what they're getting. And so the quality part of it becomes a little bit of a thing they can give up. They consider quality a luxury, and risk and quality go hand in hand. So if we think about this in the real world, if we think about this in manufacturing and making widgets, right? So maybe I'm making something that's coming off an assembly line. I'm going to look at that thing and I'm going to notice, hey, this thing goes wrong every single time. And so I'm now going to go back and I'm going to identify, hey, there's a risk to us being able to deliver this product because it has a piece that's missing or it has a part that doesn't work. And so the quality becomes part of the deliverable. But I think oftentimes in technology, we don't consider that same quality and we don't go back and say, what did we learn from this project? What did we learn from this implementation that we can now go back to the next implementation and be better because it wasn't something that was broken. I'm going to say sometimes we do if it's really bad, but if it's really bad, we still, I don't even think, learn from it from a quality perspective. It's more just a don't do that as opposed to okay, we did this and we did it mostly right, but let's think about next time, what are some risks that can happen in terms of what we learned from this last deliverable? But if we don't think about quality at the end, then we can't think about risk at the beginning again either.
As you're talking, three different things. Like first and foremost is that, again, early on in my career, I'm thankful for having some leaders, project leaders that did these practices. It became part of my standard deployment as I built PMOs, as I consulted. But doing a post-mortem, you're right, it could mostly go right, but doing a post-mortem, talking about what went right and what went wrong, it may have been minimal what went wrong, but you still want to be able to refine that. The second thought here was that I've talked about a couple times is I'm a big fan of W. Edwards Deming. And so operational excellence, if you don't know who Deming is, he was an individual that was sent over to Japan after World War II. So we've got, bombed the country, destroyed a lot of infrastructure, and he was sent over to help rebuild the country. And he was in, total quality management, TQM space. And in operations management, one of the things, and I can hear his crackly voice in my head, optimize the system. So you always talk about you're constantly optimizing. Part of it is the risk assessment around this, improving, reviewing what failed, and then improving that, constantly improving. That's how Japan was able to go from being literally bombed out to becoming a manufacturing juggernaut in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and really competing with the US at that point. And it's why the highest award for quality in Japan is the Deming Award. And I actually, I don't know if you knew this, Sharon, I actually wrote a paper with a former professor and board member for my own startup. We wrote a paper for the Deming Institute and had it published.
So cool.
Anyway, it's still out there on the interweb somewhere. I'll have to provide a link at some point. But so those two things. And then the third part of that is, we're not adequately, then prioritizing, understanding, talking about what those risks are. We also then need to prioritize them. Again, you might have some low-level risks around that. And there was a template, a methodology that I learned about in business school in the late 90s called the House of Quality. I've talked about it before, Sharon.
House of Quality.
Yeah. So it's just a template. But what it is, and whether you use it or not, you can go search for the template. It looks kind of like a house. But for product development specifically, and you can do it for services, but for product development, it's a way of looking at, like, here's all the features, here's all the things that we want to go and build. Here's the roadmap. You then weigh that against, and there's a weighting system in this template to look at, like, what does it actually take, time-wise, effort-wise, number of engineers, cost-wise around that? What are the risks associated with each of these different things? And so you weigh it looking at these different factors. And the lesson from utilizing that is you often then get a list of your priorities that are very different than what you thought. Like, as a product guy, you're going to look at it like, these are the cooler features. This is going to enable us to do all this other stuff long term. From a support perspective, you're thinking, I'm getting the most support tickets around this issue. This is the hottest issue. The sales person is saying, and marketing people are saying, we can sell more of this product if we did this. So three very different perspectives. Nobody's right or wrong on those things, but what's actually best for the company is a combination of those things. And so that's where discussion and compromise prioritizing, understanding,
Yeah.
transparency across all of those different conversations, and then prioritizing those risks.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, when we think about it, it's that whole idea of what's on fire usually takes precedence. And so, I mean, I know one of the qualities of risk management is being proactive in solving problems. And if you don't know what problems to solve, you're just going to like basically put out fires that you don't need to be putting out, or you're going to like spray water on the floor where there is no fire. And so you're going to lose, all that effort is going to go in the wrong place. And so I think when we think about risk management, people think, I think a lot of times in project management, when they do their risks and issues, it comes up with silly stuff like, well, so-and-so is going to be out of town, so this project might be late. I mean, well, that's a good risk and it's something to write down. I'm thinking bigger, like we've done this project before. And in the past, we know that if we don't meet with the stakeholder in a certain amount of time, then we're, at risk of being late. That's a different risk than a key stakeholder is going to be on vacation, right? You got to think about, to your point, from a quality perspective and from, a house of quality perspective, is what are the things that we really should be focusing on, but not just based on this project, based on history, based on other projects, not just projects I've done, but other people have done, maybe other things that people have done around the world even. What do we know to be true around risk that we need to think of so that we can be proactive from the beginning? And I think the problem that I run into with this is, I'm going to tell you my opinion of, project failure files. What do we think goes wrong? I think people don't want to put in the effort to be prepared. They don't want to put in the effort to research what the potential failures and potential risk is. And it takes far more effort to think about those types of things and identify those types of things so that you can be successful than it does to simply show up, do the meeting, do the project, and write the things down. And so I think you just have to go that one step extra to be prepared to do it.
Isn't it so funny? It's you're right, because people get down into the weeds and you just want to go get stuff done. No one wants to go through that. And I know that there's a lot of complaints, and there's valid complaints around, bureaucracy for the sake of having bureaucracy and having the process. And people, when they hear process and they got to do these meetings, we're not talking about necessarily like decisions that have to be made by committee and and hey, this is all this burden that we're adding to a project, which should be quick. No, that's part of what you need to do. Again, if you want to make this repeatable, like we're consultants, we want to go in and leverage all of our experience, like to have a checklist of here's the 50 questions I need to ask. Well, they may know exactly what they want or that they think that they want, but have that conversation. I mean, there's a reason why. Better example is, you think of anytime you call in for technical support, like Microsoft products. It's for somebody that's experienced. For an example, one of the like I've got issues. Like today, I still have an issue, permissions issue with one system. There's something broken on my profile. I don't want to go mess with the registry and go break it. What I need to do is call into Microsoft and go through that. What's frustrating about that? I know that's going to be a 2 to 4 hour call minimum. I'm not exaggerating, folks, because they have to go through and ask all the questions. They can't just take your word that you've done the steps, because what often happens is that, did you try turning it off and on, is a thing because it's a legit thing. And sometimes turning it off and on fixes the problem. Like, are you on the latest version of your browser? Did you update the latest build of that product? There's like all those different things. They have to go through that. Similarly, with any project with risk mitigation, is sometimes you've got to go ask the dumb, obvious questions and go through that process to say this, like, I've done this 100 times, and then I forgot step number 9 of the 10 steps, and so there's
a vacation during the project,
right? So you have to go through that. I mean, the other aspects of this too, that I know that we've talked a lot about. In fact, in episode 3, we talked about communication failures around risks. Like, it's not enough just to identify the stuff. Like, it needs to be that information in front of the right people at the right time. so that you can make more informed decisions. Or you move forward understanding that, and yet the VP says, move forward regardless, we'll take that risk. Like,
Yeah.
okay, it's not you as the PM, it's that the stakeholder, the owner of the project that is approving moving forward. You've got it documented, you've got it covered. Because
Yeah.
I don't know if Sharon, have you ever had the plan where the stakeholder says, yes, move forward, it didn't go well, and then they try to do the blame thing, and you're like, let me show you the email where you told me, where I told you this could happen, and you said move forward regardless.
In
I'm sure
fact, when
rare,
no, never
super
happens.
rare.
No, yeah, no, like all the time. In fact, it happens so often that when I teach anything from elicitation all the way to, project management fundamentals, when I teach those types of topics or I do a workshop on it, one of the things that I advise, especially young project managers, early project managers on is if you identify a risk and somebody tells you it doesn't matter, we're going to go forward anyways, get it in writing. Because I find that
CYA, folks.
when I tell people, if they say to me, oh, it doesn't matter, it's not a big deal, and I come back to them and say, okay, you know what, I hear you. You're the one that's paying the bill. If that's the choice you make, that's fine. But would you be willing to sign this piece of paper or send me an email making a statement that you would like to understand that you understand this risk, you're willing to go around it, we're moving on anyways? All of a sudden they kind of step back and they're like, well, I don't know if I feel comfortable doing them. I'm like, well, if you don't feel comfortable telling me that we're not going to deal with this, then maybe we need to have some further conversation. And if they are willing to do that, to your point, Christian, later on, when things inevitably fall apart, because we said they're going to fall apart based on this risk, you can be like, they're like, well, why did this fail? Well, I have an email right here where you said, we don't need to worry about this thing because it's not a problem.
Right. Well, and I've talked about, if you've got a solid communication plan, if you are regularly, like if you're, and this, maybe we should just kind of transition into best practices here. We've got just a few
Perfect
minutes.
timing.
Yeah, to go in and do that. I mean, part of it is having the communication plan. Part of that is, again, go back, watch episode 3 where we go through and talk about a bunch of these pieces. But if you're properly, adequately communicating that is, and what I've talked about in the past is I love the idea of like the 4-blocker, which is, like a 1 page for the project that you send out to your key stakeholders that has like the status, like so what's coming up, like the plan in the first square. And the second one is like, here are my blockers, or here's what I need. Here's where I'm breaking. Here's my specific asks. This is what I need the stakeholders to go and do. And then decisions made, you're identifying in that, here are the risks, and say like, this VP authorized us to move forward on this. It remains in our list of risks here, but project's still on schedule. Then if something goes wrong, it's like everybody saw that in that history there. Mm-hmm. That should be part of your communication. Going through, but then talking about playing out those potential risks, talking with the stakeholders, and having a risk management plan. So talks about, well, what happens if this happens? Here will be our next step.
Yeah.
There's something really fulfilling about that when you have a comprehensive plan, which again, it could be an iterative, live, agile process for that. But if you have that in there, when then something goes wrong, is like, we've moved to plan B on this, or we accepted this risk, then this went wrong. Okay, here's how we're mitigating this. And then back on schedule. It delayed us here. Here's where we're going to make up time over in these other areas that we buffered in case something, because we didn't know. Now we know it went wrong, but we're actually still on plan. Again, you can have those conversations because you did the planning up front.
Yeah. And I'm going to say this because every single time I talk about this topic, I hear this in the audience. But Sharon, you don't understand my culture, because we have the cultural topic, right? My culture doesn't like that. When I bring up risks and issues, every single meeting, people are like, why do we still have to talk about this? Why is this still a problem? You're making me feel bad. You're making me feel nervous. You're making me feel uncomfortable.
We want to be optimistic. Yes.
Guys, that's the job of a project manager, right? The project manager's job is to make sure that you're on top of things. And sometimes that's going to make you feel uncomfortable. And if you're in a culture where that's not okay, that might not be the right culture for you.
having the clinical approach, being able to, like, the doctor come in and it's like, you've got cancer, or, we're going to have to take the leg, but you have to be able to have the hard conversations.
Yep.
Hopefully you don't want to take the leg of the project, um, but you need to be able to have those conversations. If your culture in your organization doesn't allow you to have hard discussions, that's a problem. You're going to run into a lot of cost overruns, failed projects.
Yes.
And that's a short life for a project manager.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. I just feel like in the cultural aspect of things, if you are not able to be open and transparent about what's going on, and you're not able to bring those risks up to leadership or to the stakeholders, then, I mean, you're really putting yourself in a bad place, and you're kind of dooming yourself a little bit to, potential failure. You're going to deliver, the best you can. You're not going to deliver with operational excellence or any sort of quality. So, rethink that. Like, if you're struggling with those kinds of issues, that should be an issue to bring up in and of itself. But maybe long term, that might not be where the right culture for you, or maybe you need to have a hand in changing that culture to be more like that.
Yeah, I love the idea of having like a mini project plan for each of those risks as part of that, where you identify who are the stakeholders, who are the owners, what is the plan of action, what are the next steps around that if this goes wrong. It can just be a few different bullets around that, so people don't just look at it and be like, okay, I see that it's risk that you've defined, I don't get around it. They can see the sub bullets and, oh, this is what happens in this case. They're more, when people are part of the planning process,
Yes.
The more you involve them in the process, the more accepting they are of the process. They trust it.
Yes, agreed. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's funny how transparency is underneath every one of these topics that we cover.
And yet, like communication is the biggest issue.
Yeah. It's crazy. Well, I know, Sharon, any final thoughts? Anything else that we've left off the table here before we wrap?
I don't really think so. Just a reminder, be willing to identify the risk, be willing to communicate the risk, and always, always, always focus on quality and excellence as your goal. And if you tie risk to excellence and quality, then I feel like you're always going to be successful.
And just to wrap things up, and thank you again for watching. Please keep sending in your feedback, sharing with us. Reach out to Sharon and I. You've got our Twitter handles there. You can find us out there. You type our names into whatever browser you're using. You'll find a whole lot of content and activity there. Also, if you've not already, please go and subscribe. It's out on my YouTube page. You can see the entire series out there, all the past episodes, what's coming up, and a ton of other things that we do. Sharon and I do a lot of AMAs. We do webinars and other stuff out there, so you'll be able to find a lot of content. And then finally, we've got our community that's out on Facebook, where we'd love to hear your project management horror stories. But we've got, I think right now, the current list, I think, is 36 topics in this series that we already have identified, but we're looking to add some more. So if there's something we've not yet covered, we'll let you know if it's already on our plan, or, hey, that's a great new topic. And, we'd love to add that in and make it part of our series. So please provide feedback there. But with that, Sharon, thanks a lot for your time, and we'll see you at the next one.
See you next time, guys.
Bye.
Bye.